Hello everyone, welcome back to Whisper Tales channel. Before we get started, comment below where you are from and what time you are watching. And if you enjoy these stories, make sure to like and subscribe. Alright, let's get into it. Story 1. The Silt Keeper of Gananoque. In the summer of 1997, Marcus Hollenbeck bought a houseboat on the St. Lawrence River near Gananoque. He was 53 years old, recently divorced, and looking for what he called a reset. The houseboat was ancient, a floating relic with peeling yellow paint, and windows so clouded with age they looked like cataracts. The previous owner, an old woman named Mrs. Fenimore, sold it to him for next to nothing. She had one condition: never anchor in the channel between Constance Island and the shore after sunset. Marcus laughed it off. He was a rational man, an accountant who'd spent 3 decades reconciling numbers that always balanced. Superstitions were for people who couldn't accept that the world operated on logic, not folklore. For the first 2 weeks, he followed her advice without thinking about it. He'd motor up and down the river during the day, fish off the stern, and anchor near the marina at night. But on the 15th night, a storm rolled in faster than the weather report predicted. The sky turned the color of a bruise, and rain came down in sheets so thick he couldn't see the bow from the wheelhouse. He needed shelter, and the channel between Constance Island and the mainland was the closest protected water. He dropped anchor just as lightning split the sky. The houseboat rocked gently in the waves, and Marcus made himself dinner, microwaved pasta he ate straight from the container while watching the storm through the foggy windows. By 9 o'clock, the rain had softened to a drizzle. By 10, the river was glass smooth, reflecting the few stars that broke through the clouds. That's when he heard the scraping. It came from below, a sound like fingernails dragged across the hull. Slow, deliberate, moving from stern to bow in one long, uninterrupted line. Marcus set down his book and listened. The scraping stopped. Then it started again, this time on the port side. Same rhythm, same terrible patience. He grabbed a flashlight and went out onto the deck. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but black water and the silhouette of Constance Island 200 yards away. He pointed the light down at the waterline. The river looked thick here, almost syrupy. Silt, he thought. The bottom was shallow in the channel, full of sediment that had been settling for centuries. The scraping came again, directly beneath where he stood. Marcus knelt and shined the light straight down into the water. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then the silt moved. Not like a current disturbed it, but like something under it was shifting, rising, rearranging itself into a shape. A hand pressed against the hull from below. He could see the outline of fingers, impossibly long, each knuckle defined through the accumulation of mud and debris that clung to it. He stumbled backward. The flashlight fell from his hand and rolled across the deck, its beam spinning uselessly. When he scrambled to grab it and looked again, the hand was gone. The water was still. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the wheelhouse with every light on, staring at the radio, debating whether to call for help and say what. That he'd seen a hand made of river silt? By dawn, he'd convinced himself it was a hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and bad lighting. He pulled anchor at first light and motored back to the marina. He didn't plan to return to the channel, but Mrs. Fenimore was waiting for him on the dock. She was older than he remembered, her skin hanging loose on her frame like something that had been worn too long. She didn't greet him. She just stood there, staring, until he cut the engine and climbed off the boat. "You anchored in the channel," she said. Not a question. Marcus tried to deny it, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She knew. "It touched your boat," she continued, "which means it knows you now." "What knows me?" Mrs. Fenimore glanced at the river, then back at him. "We don't have a name for it. My husband called it the Silt Keeper. It's been in that channel longer than Gananoque's been a town, longer than there were towns at all. It takes things that don't belong. Boats, people, anchors that go down and never come back up." "That's insane," Marcus said, but his voice shook. "You'll see it again," she told him. "It doesn't forget." Marcus sold the houseboat 2 days later. He moved back to Toronto, rented an apartment on the 20th floor where there was no water in sight. But 3 weeks after he left Gananoque, he woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of scraping. It was coming from the bathroom. He walked down the hallway, his heart hammering, and pushed open the door. The bathtub was full. He hadn't filled it. The water was brown, thick with sediment, and as he watched, a hand broke the surface. The same hand from the river. Fingers elongated and jointless, dripping with silt that piled on the porcelain like wet clay. Marcus ran. He didn't pack. He left the apartment and checked into a hotel across the city. But the next night, the shower in his hotel room filled on its own. The water was the same murky brown. He didn't wait to see what came out of it. He tried staying with friends, but the Silt Keeper followed. It appeared in sinks, toilets, even a bowl of soup that turned to river water while he held the spoon. People started avoiding him. They said he looked sick, paranoid. He lost weight, stopped sleeping. 4 months after he anchored in the channel, Marcus Hollenbeck disappeared. His last known location was a motel on the outskirts of Ottawa. The cleaning staff found his room flooded, every faucet running, the bathtub overflowing with thick, dark water. In the sediment at the bottom of the tub, they found his wallet and his watch. They never found Marcus. Mrs. Fenimore died the following winter. In her belongings, they found a journal. Most of it was unremarkable, grocery lists and appointment times. But the last entry was a single sentence written in shaking handwriting. "The river takes what anchors in the wrong place." Story 2, The Lamplighter's Door. In a narrow alley off King Street in Kingston, there's a door that doesn't belong to any building. It stands alone, frame and all, wedged between a coffee shop and a law office, like someone forgot to finish tearing down whatever used to be there. The door is painted green, peeling in long strips, and it has a brass handle worn smooth from use. Most people walk past it without noticing, but some people see it, and some people open it. Tabitha Grisham was 17 when she found the door. It was late October, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. She was cutting through the alley on her way home from her shift at a bookstore, headphones in, not paying attention. She looked up, and there it was, standing in a gap she'd walked past 100 times before. She stopped, pulled out her earbuds. The alley was empty, but she had the distinct feeling she was interrupting something. The door seemed to hum, not with sound, but with presence. She reached for the handle before she could talk herself out of it. It opened. On the other side was a staircase, stone steps descending into darkness, lit by a single oil lamp hanging from a hook just inside the doorway. The air smelled like wet earth and something else, something sweet and rotting. Tabitha stood at the threshold, looking down. She could hear water dripping somewhere far below. She should have walked away. She knew that. But there was something about the stairs, about the way the lamplight flickered, that made her feel like she'd been waiting her whole life to find this door. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her on its own. She spun around, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't budge. She was locked in. The only way out was down. Tabitha descended. The stairs were steep and uneven, carved from rock that glistened with moisture. The lamp she'd seen at the entrance stayed where it was, but somehow the light followed her, always just bright enough to see the next few steps. She counted as she went. 20 steps, 50, 100. The air grew colder and the smell of rot intensified. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a tunnel. The walls were lined with doors, dozens of them, each one identical to the green door she'd entered. Some were open. Tabitha walked slowly, glancing into the rooms beyond. In one, she saw a kitchen. A woman stood at the stove, stirring a pot. The woman's back was to Tabitha, but her hair was the same shade of brown as Tabitha's mother's hair. The woman turned. Her face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin. Tabitha ran. She passed more doors. One led to a child's bedroom, the bed soaked with something dark. Another opened onto a forest, trees so dense the sky was invisible. In one room, a man sat at a desk, writing the same sentence over and over on a piece of paper. Tabitha couldn't read the words, but she could feel them pressing into her skull. At the end of the tunnel was another staircase, leading up. She climbed, her legs burning, until she reached a door at the top. This one was locked. She pounded on it, shouting, but no sound came out. Her voice was gone. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Slow, heavy, echoing. She turned. At the bottom of the stairs, silhouetted against the faint light from the tunnel, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, holding an oil lamp in one skeletal hand. The lamplighter. She didn't know how she knew the name, but it settled in her mind like a truth she'd always carried. The lamplighter began to climb. Tabitha threw herself against the door. It didn't move. She clawed at the handle, the frame, anywhere she could get purchase. The footsteps grew louder. She could hear the lamplighter breathing now, a wet, rattling sound. The door opened. She fell through and landed hard on cobblestones. The alley. She was back in the alley. The green door slammed shut behind her. She scrambled to her feet and ran, didn't stop running until she reached her house 6 blocks away. She tried to tell her parents what happened. They didn't believe her. She tried to find the door again the next day, but it wasn't there. The gap between the coffee shop and the law office was just a wall. But 3 nights later, she woke up to the smell of wet earth and rot. Her bedroom door was open. Beyond it, she could see the stone staircase, the lamp flickering in the dark. She didn't go down. She never went down. But the door appears in her house every few weeks, always when she's alone, always open, always waiting. Tabitha Grisham is 24 now. She hasn't slept through the night in 7 years. She keeps every door in her apartment locked, even the closets, especially the closets. Because sometimes, when she opens one to grab a coat, the stone stairs are there instead of her clothes. And she can hear the lamplighter, still climbing, still coming for her. Story 3. The Fold in Magnetawan. There's a spot on Highway 52, just outside Magnetawan, where the road folds. Not a curve, not a bend, a fold, like someone took the asphalt and creased it down the middle. You can't see it during the day, but at night, when headlights hit it just right, the road ahead seems to collapse into itself, and for a moment, you're driving into a place that shouldn't exist. Carter Lowell found the fold by accident. He was driving back from a fishing trip in November 2003, alone in his truck, the bed loaded with gear, and a cooler full of pike. It was past midnight, and the highway was empty. He'd driven this stretch 100 times, knew every turn, every pothole. But when his headlights swept across the road ahead, he saw something wrong. The highway looked compressed, like the distance between where he was and the next curve had been shortened, squeezed together. He slowed down, squinting through the windshield. The road seemed to ripple. the yellow lines bending in ways that made his stomach lurch. He should have stopped. Turned around. But Carter was stubborn, and he told himself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. He drove into the fold. The truck lurched, not forward, but sideways, like he'd been shoved by a gust of wind. The steering wheel spun in his hands, and the world outside the windows blurred. When it cleared, he was still on Highway 520. Same trees, same road, same yellow lines. But the sky was wrong. It was still night, but the stars were gone. The sky was a flat, matte black, like someone had painted over it. And the silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, no hum from the engine. Carter realized his truck had stalled. He turned the key. The engine coughed but didn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. He got out. The air was too still. It pressed against him, thick and heavy, and when he exhaled, his breath didn't fog even though it had been near freezing when he entered the fold. He looked back down the highway. It stretched behind him, perfectly straight, vanishing into the distance. He looked ahead. Same thing. No fold. No way back. Carter started walking. He didn't have a plan, just a vague idea that if he kept moving, he'd eventually reach somewhere real. The road was identical in both directions, so he picked one and started walking. He walked for what felt like hours. The highway never changed. No signs, no turnoffs, no landmarks, just road and trees and that terrible, empty sky. Then he saw the truck. His truck. It was parked in the middle of the road, exactly where he'd left it. He was sure he'd walked in a straight line, never turned around. But here it was. He approached slowly, his heart hammering. The driver's side door was open. He looked inside. The keys were in the ignition. His coffee thermos was in the cup holder, still half full. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except there was someone in the passenger seat. Carter stumbled backward. The figure didn't move. It sat perfectly still, hands folded in its lap, head tilted slightly forward. It was wearing his clothes, his jacket, his boots, his hat. But the face was wrong, smooth, featureless, like it hadn't been finished. Carter ran. He didn't know where he was running, just away. The road blurred past him, and he ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out. When he collapsed, gasping, he looked up and saw the truck again. Parked in the same spot. Door open. Figure in the passenger seat. This time the figure's head turned toward him. Carter screamed. He got up and ran again, but this time the road didn't stay straight. It began to fold, the asphalt bending upward at sharp angles, forming walls on either side of him. He was running through a corridor of highway, the yellow lines spiraling up the walls like veins. He tripped and fell. When he looked up, the figure was standing over him. It reached down, and Carter saw its hand was identical to his, every scar and callus in the right place. It touched his face. Carter woke up in his truck. The engine was running. The sky was full of stars. He was parked on the shoulder of Highway 520, just outside Magnetawan, exactly where he should be. He drove home. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. But when he got home and looked in the mirror, something was wrong. His reflection moved a half-second too slow. And when he spoke, the words came out just slightly delayed, like his body was dubbing over a script. Carter Lowell still lives in Magnetawan. He doesn't drive at night anymore. He doesn't talk much either. His wife says he's been different since the fishing trip. Distant, like he's somewhere else even when he's sitting right next to her. And sometimes, late at night, she hears him in the garage, standing in front of his truck, talking to someone in the passenger seat. But when she turns on the light, he's always alone. Story 4. The Partition in Thunder Bay. In 1989, The Hillcrest apartment complex in Thunder Bay installed new walls in half of its units. The building was old, built in the 50s, and the landlord wanted to modernize, split the larger apartments into smaller ones to increase occupancy. The construction company he hired was cheap, unlicensed, and gone within a month of finishing the job. The tenants in the newly partitioned units started complaining immediately. They heard things on the other side of the walls, voices, footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved. The landlord told them it was the people in the adjacent apartments. But the complaints didn't stop, because the people in the adjacent apartments heard the same things. And when they knocked on the walls to tell their neighbors to quiet down, the knocking came back from the other side. From inside the walls. Simone Pruitt moved into Unit 407 in March of 1990. She was a graduate student at Lakehead University, studying environmental science, and the rent was cheap enough that she could afford it on her stipend. The apartment was small, a bedroom and a living area separated by one of the new partition walls. The wall was thin, hollow when she tapped it, and she could hear everything from the unit next door. Except there was no unit next door. Unit 407 was at the end of the hallway. On one side was 406. On the other was the exterior wall of the building. But the partition ran down the middle of her apartment, splitting it in two, and Simone could hear someone on the other side. At first it was faint. Footsteps, the creak of a chair, the rustle of paper. She told herself it was sound traveling through the vents, or vibrations from another floor. But on her third night in the apartment, she heard a voice. It was muffled, like someone speaking through fabric, but she could make out the words. "Can you hear me?" Simone froze. She was sitting on her bed, textbook open in her lap. She stared at the partition wall. The voice came again. "I know you're there. Please, can you hear me?" It was a woman's voice, desperate. Simone stood and walked to the wall. She pressed her ear against it. "Hello?" "Oh, thank God," the voice said. "I've been calling for days. I thought no one was listening." "Who are you?" "My name is Angela. Angela Dufresne. I'm trapped. I need help." Simone stepped back. "Trapped where?" "In here, in the wall." Simone's skin went cold. "That's not possible." "Please," Angela said. "I don't know how I got here. I woke up and I was in this space. It's so small. I can't see anything. I can't find a door. Please, you have to get me out." Simone called the landlord. He came up an hour later, annoyed, and knocked on the wall. Solid. He shook his head and told Simone there was no one in the wall, that she was probably hearing pipes or the building settling. He left before she could argue. But Angela kept talking. She talked all night. She described the space she was in, a narrow room with walls so close she could touch both sides at once. No windows, no light, just darkness and the smell of plaster dust. She begged Simone to find a way to break through the wall, to pull her out. Simone didn't sleep. She sat on the floor with her back against the partition, listening. By dawn, Angela's voice was hoarse. "I'm so thirsty," she whispered. "How long have I been in here?" Simone called the police. They came, they listened, they knocked on the wall. They told her the same thing the landlord had. There was no one inside. The wall was solid. They suggested she see a doctor. But that night, Angela screamed. It went on for hours. Simone covered her ears, but the sound seeped through. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. "Angela?" Simone whispered. No answer. She pressed her hands against the wall. "Angela, are you okay?" Nothing. Simone grabbed a hammer from under her sink. She didn't care if the landlord evicted her. She didn't care if the police thought she was insane. She swung the hammer at the partition wall. The plaster cracked. She hit it again. And again. The wall broke apart, revealing the hollow space between the studs. It was empty. No Angela. No body. Just dust and darkness. Simone moved out the next day. She didn't tell anyone what she'd done. She left the broken wall and never came back. But 3 weeks later, she got a phone call. It was the landlord. He wanted to know why she'd destroyed the wall in Unit 407. "You already know," Simone said. "No," he replied. "I'm calling because we found something when we went to repair it." Simone's hand started shaking. "There was a name carved into one of the studs," the landlord continued. "Angela Dufresne, and a date. March 1952. Simone hung up. She looked up the name that night. Angela Dufresne had lived in the Hillcrest apartment complex in the early 50s. She disappeared in March of 1952. No body was ever found. The building was renovated that same year. New walls installed throughout. Simone never heard Angela's voice again. But sometimes, late at night, she hears knocking. From inside the walls of whatever apartment she's in. And when she presses her ear against the plaster, she can hear someone whispering. Can you hear me? Story 5. The Culling at Rainy River. In the winter of 2001, something started killing the ice fishers on Rainy River. Not something natural, not wolves or bears or bad ice, something deliberate. The first victim was Hugh Morrissey, a 62-year-old retired mechanic who'd been fishing the river for 40 years. He went out alone on a Saturday morning in January, set up his shelter 2 miles from the boat launch, and drilled his holes. By noon, he hadn't checked in with his wife. By evening, she called the authorities. They found his shelter the next morning. The holes were still open, his gear neatly arranged, his thermos half full of coffee. But Hugh was gone. The only tracks leading away from the shelter were his own, a single set of boot prints heading out onto the ice. They followed the tracks for a 1/4 mile before they stopped. Not at open water, not at a crack in the ice. The prints just ended, mid-stride, as if Hugh had been plucked off the surface and carried away. The second victim was a week later, then a third, then 2 in one day. All of them experienced ice fissures, all of them alone. All of them vanished from the middle of the frozen river, leaving behind nothing but their equipment and footprints that led nowhere. By February, people stopped fishing Rainy River. The town of Rainy River itself went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like breath held too long. But the killings didn't stop, because whatever was taking the fishers started coming onto land. Margot Vega was the first to see it. She lived in a house overlooking the river, a small cabin her grandfather had built in the 30s. She woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of something scratching at her window. She turned on the bedside lamp and saw it. A figure standing outside, tall and skeletal, its skin the color of old ice. It had too many joints, arms that bent in wrong places, and its face was smooth except for a vertical crack down the center, like something had split its skull in half. It pressed one hand against the glass. The fingers were impossibly long, tipped with nails that looked like frozen bone. Margot screamed. The figure tilted its head, studying her, then turned and walked toward the river. She watched it go, her heart hammering, and when it reached the ice, it didn't walk across. It sank into the surface, the frozen river opening like water to swallow it whole. She called the police. They found nothing. But the next night, someone else saw it. And the night after that, someone else. It came to windows. It stood on porches. It lingered at the edges of yards, always watching, always silent. And anyone who saw it, anyone who looked it in the eye, disappeared within a week. Margot Vega was gone by the end of February. Her cabin was undisturbed, her car still in the driveway, her coffee mug still on the table. The only sign of struggle was the back door, which had been opened from the inside. The police found her boot prints leading down to the river. They ended at the ice. By March, 18 people had vanished. The Ontario Provincial Police set up a command center, brought in search and rescue, even consulted with Indigenous elders from nearby Fort Frances. One elder, a man named Thomas Odjig, came to the river and stood on the ice for a long time, not speaking. When he finally turned to the officers, his face was grim. "This is a culling," he said. "Something old is waking up and it's hungry." "What is it?" they asked. "We don't have a name for it in English," Thomas said. "In the old language we call it the thing that takes. It's been asleep under the river for a long time. But every few generations, it wakes up. And when it does, it takes people until it's full." "How do we stop it?" Thomas shook his head. "You don't. The disappearances stopped in April when the ice began to thaw. By summer, Rainy River was a ghost town. Half the population had left, and the ones who stayed didn't talk about what had happened. The police closed the case, labeled the victims as missing persons, and moved on. But the ice fishers know. They know that when winter comes, you don't go out on Rainy River. You don't drill holes. You don't look at the ice too long, because sometimes you can see shapes moving under the surface. Long, skeletal shapes with too many joints. And if you see one, if you make eye contact through the ice, it sees you too. And come spring, when the river thaws, someone will find your boot prints leading out onto the frozen water. And they'll end right in the middle, where the ice has been broken from below. Story 6. The Tenant of Burks Falls. The Ashford Hotel in Burks Falls closed in 1978, after a century of operation. It was a beautiful building, 3 stories of red brick and white trim, with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the morning sun. But by the 70s, it had fallen into disrepair, and the owner couldn't afford the upkeep. The doors were locked, the furniture covered in sheets, and the building sat empty for 30 years. In 2008, a developer from Toronto bought the property with plans to convert it into condos. The construction crew arrived in May, ready to gut the interior and start fresh. But on their first day, they found something that made them stop. Room 212 was occupied. The door was locked from the inside. They could hear someone moving around in there, the creak of footsteps on old floorboards. The foreman knocked. No answer. He called out, identified himself, said they were there to start renovations. The footsteps stopped. He used a key to unlock the door. The room was empty, furniture still covered in sheets, dust thick on every surface. But the bed had been slept in. The covers were pulled back, the pillow indented. And on the nightstand was a glass of water, condensation still beading on the outside. The foreman checked the windows, locked from the inside. He checked the closet, the bathroom. Nothing. No way in or out except the door he'd just unlocked. The crew didn't think much of it. Burks Falls was a small town, and small towns had transients. Someone had probably broken in, spent the night, and slipped out when they heard the crew arriving. They aired out the room and moved on. But the next morning, room 212 was occupied again. This time there was a meal on the table. Eggs and toast, still warm, with a fork resting on the edge of the plate. The bed was unmade. The bathroom sink was wet. The foreman called the police. They searched the building top to bottom. No one. They dusted for fingerprints. None. They set up cameras in the hallway outside room 212 and reviewed the footage the next day. The hallway was empty all night. No one entered. No one left. But in the morning, the room was occupied again. This time there was a suitcase by the bed. Old-fashioned, leather with brass buckles. The foreman opened it. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, in styles from the 1940s. Men's clothes, a razor, a pocket watch, and at the bottom a hotel registry card. Name, Edmund Carvel. Room 212. Check-in, September 14th, 1947. The foreman brought the card to the Burks Falls Historical Society. They found a record of Edmund Carvel. He'd been a traveling salesman who stayed at the Ashford Hotel for one night in September of 1947. He checked in on the 14th. He never checked out. His body was found in room 212 3 days later. Heart attack, the coroner said. He died in his sleep. The construction crew wanted to quit, but the developer insisted they keep working. He offered them double pay to finish the job. They agreed, but they avoided room 212. They gutted every other room in the building, ripped out walls, tore up floors. Room 212 they left alone. Until one night, the foreman got a phone call. It was 3 a.m, and the voice on the other end was faint, crackling with static. "Why are you tearing down my hotel?" the voice asked. "Who is this?" the foreman said. "This is Edmund Carvel. I'm in room 212, and I'd like to know why you're tearing down my hotel." The foreman hung up. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, he went to the Ashford Hotel and stood outside room 212. He could hear someone inside, moving around, humming a tune he didn't recognize. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was furnished, not with the old covered furniture, but with pieces from the 40s. A wooden dresser, a brass bed frame, lace curtains on the windows, and sitting in a chair by the window, reading a newspaper, was a man. He looked up when the foreman entered. He was middle-aged, balding, wearing a suit that had been out of style for 60 years. "Can I help you?" the man asked. The foreman couldn't speak. He stood in the doorway, frozen, staring. "I asked if I could help you," the man repeated. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. "You're Edmund Carvel," the foreman finally said. The man smiled. "I am, and you're the one tearing down my hotel. This isn't your hotel. You're dead." Edmund set down the newspaper and stood. He walked toward the foreman, slow and deliberate. "I paid for this room," he said. "I checked in on September 14th, 1947, and I haven't checked out, which means this room is mine." The foreman backed into the hallway. Edmund followed, stepping across the threshold. And as he did, the room behind him changed. The furniture vanished. The walls returned to peeling plaster. The air smelled like dust and rot. Edmund looked down at himself. His suit was decaying, the fabric crumbling. His skin turned gray, then black, then translucent. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He reached for the foreman, his hand dissolving into smoke. Then he was gone. The foreman quit that day. The entire crew quit. The developer tried to hire a new team, but word had spread. No one would work on the Ashford Hotel. The building still stands in Burks Falls, empty and rotting. The windows are boarded up, the porch collapsing. But sometimes, late at night, people walking past see a light in the window of room 212. And if they stop and look closely, they can see a man sitting in a chair, reading a newspaper, waiting to check out. Story 7. The broadcast from Sudbury. In October 2004, a radio station in Sudbury started broadcasting a signal that wasn't on their schedule. It came through at 3:33 a.m. every night on 98.7 FM, and it lasted exactly 7 minutes. The signal was a voice, a woman reading a list of names. At first, people thought it was a memorial segment, something honoring the dead. But the names weren't familiar. They weren't local. And when listeners called the station to ask about the broadcast, the DJs had no idea what they were talking about. The station manager, a man named Victor Trudell, reviewed the logs. There was no record of the broadcast. No one had scheduled it. No one was in the building at 3:33 a.m. But the signal kept airing, night after night. the same woman's voice reading the same list of names. Victor decided to listen. He stayed at the station one night, alone in the studio, and tuned the radio to 98.7 FM. At 3:33, the voice came through. It was calm, measured, almost mechanical. The woman didn't pause between names, didn't inflect, just read them one after another in a steady rhythm. Victor grabbed a pen and started writing them down. By the time the broadcast ended at 3:40, he had 32 names. He didn't recognize any of them. The next day, he ran the names through an online search. The first name, Patricia Hollis, came back with an obituary. She'd died in Sudbury 3 days earlier. The second name, Marcus Penn, had an obituary from the week before. The third, fourth, fifth, all of them were recent deaths, all of them in Sudbury. Victor's hands started shaking. He checked the rest of the names. Every single one was someone who had died in Sudbury within the past month. The broadcast wasn't honoring the dead. It was listing them. He called the police. They told him it was probably a prank, someone hacking the signal. But Victor knew the station's equipment. He knew how hard it would be to hijack a broadcast like that, especially at the same time every night. He stayed at the station again the next night. This time he recorded the broadcast. When he played it back the next morning, the quality was strange. The woman's voice was layered, like multiple recordings played at once, slightly out of sync. And in the background, faint but unmistakable, he could hear breathing. Victor stopped listening after that. He told the staff to ignore the broadcast, told them it would stop eventually. But it didn't. It kept airing, every night at 3:33, the list of names growing longer. And then, in November, Victor heard his own name. He was at home, lying in bed, unable to sleep. He turned on the radio and tuned it to 98.7 FM. At 3:33, the voice began. He listened to the names, his heart pounding, and halfway through the list, she said it. Victor Trudell. He sat up, grabbed the radio, shook it like he could dislodge the words. The voice continued, unbothered, moving on to the next name. Victor called in sick the next day. He didn't leave his house. He locked the doors, closed the curtains, and tried to convince himself it was a coincidence. Someone playing a cruel joke. But 3 days later, Victor Trudell had a heart attack in his living room. He was found by his neighbor, who'd noticed his mail piling up. The broadcast continued. Every night at 3:33, the woman's voice reads names. And if you listen, really listen, you might hear your own. The station tried to stop it. They changed frequencies, replaced equipment, even brought in an engineer from Toronto to sweep for interference. Nothing worked. The broadcast kept airing. In 2006, the station shut down. The building was sold, turned into office space. But people in Sudbury still pick up the signal. It doesn't matter what radio they use, what frequency they're tuned to. At 3:33 a.m., the voice comes through. And the list keeps growing. If you're in Sudbury and you're listening to the radio late at night, turn it off before 3:33. Because if you hear your name, you have 3 days. 3 days before your name moves from the broadcast to the obituary. Story 8. The Stain in Barrie. There's a house on Letitia Street in Barrie that no one will buy. It's been on the market for 16 years, the price dropping every year, and still it sits empty. The yard is overgrown, the paint is peeling, and the windows are dark. But the house isn't the problem. The problem is the stain. It's in the basement, in the northwest corner, on the concrete floor. It's roughly the size of a person, dark and rust-colored, and no matter what anyone does, it won't come out. People have tried bleach, industrial cleaners, even sandblasting. The stain comes back, and it's getting bigger. The house used to belong to a man named Roland Finch. He bought it in 1998, lived there alone for 6 years. Neighbors said he was quiet, kept to himself, didn't cause trouble. But in 2004, he disappeared. His mail piled up. His lawn grew wild. After 2 weeks, the police did a wellness check. They found the house empty, but when they went down to the basement, they found the stain. At first, they thought it was blood. They tested it. The results came back inconclusive. Organic material, but not blood. Not anything they could identify. They brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs refused to go into the basement. Roland Finch was never found. The house was sold to a couple from Toronto in 2005. They moved in, started renovations, and noticed the stain immediately. They scrubbed it, painted over it, poured new concrete on top of it. The stain came back. And it was bigger. The couple called a contractor. He looked at the stain and refused to touch it. He said there was something wrong with the house, something in the foundation. He left and didn't come back. The couple tried to ignore it. But every time they went into the basement, the stain had grown. By the end of the first month, it had spread across half the floor. And they started hearing things. Dripping. It sounded like water, slow and rhythmic, coming from the corner where the stain was darkest. But there were no pipes in that corner. No source for a leak. The husband went down one night with a flashlight. He stood over the stain, listening. The dripping was louder down there, almost deafening. He knelt and touched the stain. It was wet. He pulled his hand back. His fingers were covered in something thick and dark. He smelled it. Rot. Like meat left out too long. He ran upstairs and washed his hands, but the smell wouldn't come off. It stayed with him for days, soaked into his skin, and no matter how much he scrubbed, he could still smell it. The couple moved out a week later. They didn't try to sell. They just left. The house sat empty for 2 years. In 2007, a real estate investor bought it, planning to flip it. He hired a crew to renovate, but the crew refused to work after the first day. They said the basement felt wrong, that the air down there was too thick, too cold. One worker claimed he saw the stain move, saw it ripple like water. The investor went down to see for himself. The stain had spread across the entire floor, and in the center, where it was darkest, he saw something. A shape. It looked like a hand, pressed against the concrete from below, fingers splayed. He stared at it, and as he watched, the fingers twitched. The investor sold the house immediately. He took a loss and never spoke about it again. Since then, the house has changed hands 6 times. No one stays longer than a month, and the stain keeps growing. The current owner, a woman named Ingrid Poole, bought it in 2019. She didn't believe the stories. She thought they were urban legends, something to drive the price down. She moved in with her teenage son, and for the first week, everything seemed fine. Then her son went into the basement. He came back up pale, shaking. He said he'd seen someone down there, standing in the corner where the stain was. A man, tall and thin, with his back to the stairs. The man didn't move, didn't turn around, but the boy could hear him breathing. Ingrid went down to check. The basement was empty, but the stain had grown again. It covered the floor, the walls, even part of the ceiling, and in the center the shape of a hand was clearer now, more defined. She put the house back on the market the next day. It's still for sale. If you drive past it at night, you can see a faint light in the basement window. And if you're brave enough to look closely, you might see a figure standing in the corner, tall and thin, with its back to the glass. But don't knock on the door, don't go inside, because the stain is still growing. And it's not just a stain anymore. Story 9. The passenger on the 401. The stretch of Highway 401 between Chatham and London is one of the busiest in Ontario. Thousands of cars travel it every day. Trucks hauling goods across the province, families driving to visit relatives. But at night, when the traffic thins and the highway becomes a ribbon of darkness between empty fields, some drivers see something they can't explain. A passenger. It starts with the mirrors. You're driving alone, and you glance at your rearview mirror, and for just a second, you see someone in the back seat. You blink. Look again. Nothing. You tell yourself it was a trick of the light, a shadow from a passing car. But then you feel the seat shift, the weight of someone settling in behind you. You don't look back. You can't. Because some part of you, some primal part that predates logic, knows that if you turn around, you'll see something you can't unsee. The passenger doesn't speak. It doesn't move. It just sits there, breathing. You can hear it. Slow, wet breaths, like someone drowning on dry land. And the longer you drive, the colder it gets. The heat stops working. Your breath fogs. The windows frost over from the inside. You drive faster. You want to pull over, but the exits are miles apart. And something tells you that stopping is worse. So you keep driving, hands gripping the wheel, eyes locked on the road, and you pray that when you finally reach your exit, the passenger will be gone. Most of the time, it is. You pull off the highway, park at a gas station, and when you check the back seat, it's empty. Nothing but fast food wrappers and an old jacket. You convince yourself it was exhaustion, stress, too many hours on the road. But some people don't make it to the exit. In 2011, a truck driver named Leonard Foss was found dead in his rig on the shoulder of the 401, just east of Chatham. Heart attack, the coroner said. But Leonard was 42, healthy, no history of heart problems. And when the police examined the truck, they found something strange. The windows were covered in frost, from the inside. It was July, and in the passenger seat, pressed into the fabric, was the outline of a person, like someone had sat there for hours, their weight leaving an impression that wouldn't fade. Leonard's widow told the police that he'd called her the night he died. He said there was someone in the truck with him, someone he couldn't see but could feel. He was terrified. She told him to pull over, but he said he couldn't. He said if he stopped, it would take him. He was found 6 hours later. The passenger has been reported dozens of times, always on the 401 between Chatham and London, always at night. And it doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you're in, cars, trucks, even motorcycles. If you're alone and it's dark, the passenger might find you. There's no pattern to who it chooses. Men, women, young, old. It doesn't discriminate, and no one knows what it wants. But there are theories. Some people say it's the ghost of a hitchhiker, someone who died on the highway decades ago and is still trying to get home. Others say it's something older, something that was here before the highway, before the roads, before the towns. A thing that feeds on fear, on the loneliness of the long drive. One woman, a paramedic named Claire Deschamps, survived an encounter and tried to explain it. She was driving home after a night shift, alone, the highway empty. She felt the passenger get in around 2 in the morning. She didn't look back. She kept driving. But the cold was unbearable, and the breathing grew louder, and she could feel its presence pressing against her, suffocating. She started talking. She didn't know why. She just needed to fill the silence. She told the passenger about her day, about the calls she'd responded to, about the people she'd saved and the ones she couldn't. She talked about her family, her dog, her favorite coffee shop. She talked until her voice was hoarse. And slowly, the cold faded. The breathing stopped. When she glanced in the mirror, the back seat was empty. Claire still drives the 401, but she never drives alone at night anymore. And she keeps her radio on, loud, filling the car with sound. Because silence is what it wants, silence, and fear, and the certainty that you're alone. But you're not. Not on the 401, not at night. So if you're driving that stretch of highway and you feel the seat shift behind you, don't look back. Don't stop. Just keep driving. And talk. Fill the silence with anything, even if it's just your own voice, because the passenger is listening. And if you stay quiet long enough, it won't just sit there anymore. It will reach forward and touch your shoulder. And when you finally do look back, you'll see its face in the mirror. And you'll understand why no one who sees it ever talks about what they saw, because some things are too terrible to put into words. The 401 is always waiting, and so is the passenger.